Hello, welcome to View from the Post, a podcast from pickleball referees for pickleball players. The purpose of this podcast is to help players better understand the rules of pickleball and how to deal with obscure on court situations in both officiated and unofficiated matches. I'm Bob Swisshelm, a USA Pickleball certified referee and a member of the APP head ref team.
Hello, I'm Mike Bumgarner, USA Pickleball Certified Referee and the Director of Officiating for the APP Tour. As Bob mentioned, we're putting together this podcast to help the pickleball players understand, some of the rules that are associated with pickleball, how to deal with those, some of the procedures that the referees will use during a tournament, such as the pre-match briefing. So this series of podcasts will introduce all of those and help you understand going forward how it might help your game.
So the first topic of this podcast, as I said, is the start of a series. We want to talk about things that referees wish players knew. Our first couple of topics in that general frame will be hinders versus distractions and referee responsibilities and priorities.
Thank you, Bob, for introducing that. So we'll jump right into the hinders versus distraction conversation and how the distraction and hinder rules and definitions and applications apply to a match that's being refereed. So the first thing I want to talk about is the definition of a hinder, or I'm sorry, the definition of a distraction. So in the USA Pickleball rule book, 3A7 distraction talks about physical actions by a player that are not common to the game that, in the judgment of a referee, interfere with the opponent's ability or concentration to hit the ball. Examples include, but are not limited to, making loud noises, stomping of feet, and waving the paddle in a distracting manner. So then if you're inside the rule book, you look at 11J, it talks about the application of the distraction definition. So when we read that application, distractions. Players shall not distract an opponent when the opponent is about to play the ball. If in the judgment of the referee, a player has distracted their opponent, the referee shall immediately call a fault on the offending team. See Rule 3A7, which I just read. So what do you think about this, Bob?
So there's two components that you've listed, and it's very important that we understand both of those. One is what is a distraction, and when is a distraction a fault? And so those two things are very key that certainly the referee needs to understand, and then also players need to understand. There are common times when someone says, "Well, that was a distraction. That was a distraction," and either it didn't qualify as the definition of a distraction, or it didn't happen at the actual time that was necessary for it to be labeled a distraction. Uh, One of our favorite referees, who was renamed nameless, kind of has coined the phrase, "Well, it might have been distracting, but it is not a distraction."
Yeah, it's a great comment because a lot of things that players believe are distracting, they also believe can be a distraction. And by definition and rule, many times that does not apply. One thing that players need to understand when they're in a refereed match, distractions are the single hardest call for a referee to make. Referee must be on point. They must be basically waiting for something like this to happen. Many times a player will stop play because they think something was a distraction, and they'll be faulted for stopping play because the referee, as it says in the definition, it's in the judgment of the referee, didn't necessarily feel like that it rose to the level of a distraction.
Now, can you refresh my memory? What's the consequence of a distraction call?
Well, the consequence of a distraction call is a fault, right? So if the referee believes it was a distraction, the player that did the distraction will be faulted.
So, but suppose the player says, "Oh, well, okay, that was confusing. Let's just do a replay."
Well, see, there's the difference when we talking about the distraction versus a hinder. So a distraction is not a replay, will never be a replay if in fact the referee has called it a distraction. It is a fault. Hinder, we can get into the definition of a hinder. So Rule 3A16, and we talk about uh, the definition of a hinder. Any transient element or occurrence not caused by a player that adversely impacts play, not including permanent objects. Examples include, but are not limited to, balls, flying insects, foreign material, players, or officials on another court that, in the opinion of the referee, impacted a player's ability to make a play on the ball. Anytime a hinder is called, you will have a replay. But the difference between a distraction and a hinder is that is a referee's call, number one, to call the distraction. And in the case of the hinder, many times a player can call a hinder as well. So when we look at, if we're playing doubles, we have five people on the court, we have, two teams of two, and we have the referee. Many times, the referee will allow a player to also call a hinder, a ball coming on court to stop play, and the referee will honor that and have a replay of the point many times.
And to me, it's an interesting distinction between the hindered definition and the distraction definition. So that's coming back to our previous scenario where opponent A does something that is distracting, but does not rise to the level of a distraction. And then their opponent says, well, let's do a hinder. Well, by definition, what you just read, the hinder is by somebody who's not on court. So there is actually no opportunity for you to call a hinder based upon your opponent's action. Either that action is going to be common to the game or allowed or whatever, or it's going to be a distraction, but it will never be a hinder. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. Yeah, without a
And so,
doubt.
like a common example, and this is we future topics we're going to talk about line calls. But let's say, for example, that a player, while the ball is in the air, yells out, and they're communicating to their partner, but the ball actually lands in, and then they continue to play the ball. Now, if their opponent says, well, the ball, they called it out and that was distracting. And the short answer is no. Number one, it's common to the game. Number two, it's player communication. Number three, it happened before the ball landed. So it was not an out call. So you just play on. And if the opponent allows that to them to mess with their head and they actually stop play, which you've talked about earlier. If you stop play, you're always running the risk that you've stopped play inappropriately, and therefore you will end up getting the fault and lose that rally.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the rules of thumb, in my opinion, if you're a player, you should never stop play if you think something is incorrect. If it's especially if it's something that's in the judgment of the referee. And in this case, the distraction call is in the judgment of the referee, and you should not stop play. If in fact it has happened, the referee should recognize it and call it themselves. So,
And let's
golden rule, never stop play as a player.
Yes, I like that. I like that because you have opportunities, you have recourses afterwards as a player to challenge your opponent about whether or not they committed a fault, and that's the better time to have that particular discussion. Um, I lost my train of thought, so I'll we'll move on. Distractions, then. When we talk about the hinder versus the distraction, was there anything else on the hinder that you wanted to talk about?
Just one thing that it includes in here is not including permanent objects. So permanent objects, when we're talking about pickleball, the the post is a permanent object. A wall or a fence behind the baseline is a permanent object. If you're playing indoors, it could be a overhanging basketball net or backboard. Those are all permanent objects and should be considered permanent objects. They're not within the definition of a hinder.
What
Yeah,
about the referee?
uh, referee on that particular court, not considered a hinder, is considered a permanent object.
Correct, right. So what about the referee on the next court?
Could be considered a hinder A player coming in from another court into your court could definitely be considered a hinder. So yeah, both of those could be. Um,
Or even so, depending upon how close your court is to the other court, you're going to have a referee that has their back to you, that is positioned at the net watching their court, and you're trying to do an ATP, and that referee on the other court is in your way of trying to do the ATP. Would that be considered a hinder?
According to the definition of the rule, yes, the last line impacted a player's ability to make a play on the ball. So the referee on the other court, if you're trying to do an ATP, it hits the referee, could be considered a hinder. Doesn't necessarily have to be. It's referee judgment.
And these are interesting conversations, and we have these amongst the referees as well. And the reason why I pointed that out is because sometimes you'll have referees say, well, by definition, the referee is a permanent object. Well, the referee on your court is a permanent object. The
And
referee
that's
on
why,
another court could potentially be a hinder.
exactly right. And that's why I asked the question, or I made the statement, referee on your court
Yep.
versus referee on another court, for sure.
Okay. Anything else
So
on?
let's go back real quick to stopping play. Like I said, golden rule, don't stop play. If you believe either of these things that happen, you could be subjected to a fault.
So, and maybe this was the thing that I was trying to remember is that, let's say that I want to complain about something that my opponent has done. Either they've double bounced or whatever. And I listen to you and I say, well, I don't want to stop play. What are my recourses at the end of that rally?
You can always ask for the head referee to come out. But understand if the head referee comes out and rules against you, there are penalties associated with that.
Well, and even before that, am I allowed to suggest to my opponent that they somehow committed a fault? We're in an unofficiated match here.
Oh, yes, for sure. You can talk to the opponent and to try to talk to them about, that was a particular fault, but they don't necessarily have to agree with you.
Correct, correct. So, and because, and we'll again talk about this later on about who is responsible for those types of things. But basically, it's the person who is accused of being of having the fault that, in most cases, is the one that actually has the final decision about whether, particularly in unofficiated matches, of whether or not they actually committed that particular fault. And if not, then you end up having to accept their particular statement. Hopefully, they have read. Here we're talking about things that we wish players would know. There's a recommendation of sportsmanship and code of conduct for players, and one of those statements is that if you recognize that you have committed a fault, you should acknowledge that particular fault. Don't necessarily wait for somebody else to call it on you.
Yes, for sure.
Anything else on hinders and distractions that you wanted to chat about?
Not necessarily. I think we've covered the definition, the application of distraction, and we've also talked about the definition of a hinder. Just understand that this something can be distracting doesn't
Do
necessarily
you have
mean.
any other scenarios that you want to talk through? I've got a couple to help us understand. Um,
I don't. Go ahead, Bob.
so
What do you?
one thing that I used to, I remember getting particularly irate just as a player, that my opponents, I'm playing doubles, and the receiver's partner is standing at the non-volley zone, and they're actually going like this while I'm trying to serve the ball. What do you think about that?
I see, as a referee, you're trying to serve the ball. I mean, as a player,
As a
you're
server,
trying to
right?
serve the ball, and they're making some crazy thing here. Yeah, that's gonna hurt. That's gonna break the concentration of you, right?
Yep,
Serving the ball.
yep.
So yeah, definitely. I could definitely as a referee, I could call a distraction fault for that. No
Yeah,
doubt about it.
I try to remain relatively calm when I'm playing recreational matches. I got a little bit irate with him, and I still remember saying, "You can't do that." And I forced a I didn't fault him for it, but I forced a replay in this particular case. It's like, no, 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 no. That's technically a distraction. What about
Yeah,
somebody?
so that's what's hard about being a referee and you try to go out and play and you see people breaking rules all the time. It's like, oh my goodness, do I say anything? Do I not say anything? For me, no, I don't say anything. I just play and try to have a good time while I'm
Right.
playing. I'm not worried about the other stuff like that. I constantly walk around and watch people playing rec play and they're stepping on the baselines when they're serving and they're faulting, they're kitchen faults or all this other stuff. And it's just like, yeah, well, it's just for
Yeah, no
fun.
big deal. No big deal. I will
Yeah.
sometimes talk to people either after the rally or at the end of the game, that type of thing. What about a receiver's partner who stands right on the middle line and is just kind of staring you down and daring you to do a nasty Nelson on them? What about that?
Yeah, you know what? They can stand wherever they want. It
Yep.
might be distracting, but it's not a
Right.
distraction.
And actually, that's relatively common in the game. That's something that you see quite a bit. What about so you've served, the receiver is now getting ready to return the ball, and the receiver's partner is fainting is the word I use, but they're beginning to move over, and then
Yeah.
they're going this way and then they're going that way, and then you don't know exactly what they're going to do. Is that a distraction?
Well, no, see, I wouldn't call that a distraction. Why wouldn't I call that a distraction? Because I don't understand the intent of what he's trying to do, right? Is he trying to throw me off my game, or is he trying to get in a position to make a play on the ball somewhere? So, no, as a referee, I can't call that a distraction because I don't know what the purpose of what he's doing is for,
Okay,
right?
now let me ask you about, well, suppose he is trying, because I've chatted, not that I use them, but I've chatted with players who have three signals, and I don't remember, what they are behind their back. The receiver's making the signal,
Yeah, they got
and
this,
one of
this,
them,
and
one is stay, one
three.
is move, and the other one is actually faint or pretend to move. So actually, they are doing it on purpose to make it harder for their opponent to decide what they're doing. But to me, that's part of the game. That's
That's
strategery.
more strategy than it is
Right.
anything,
Yeah.
right? Not if it is distracting to you as a player, sorry, but it's not necessarily risen to the level of distraction by definition.
Right. Okay. Cool. Cool. Anything else on hinders? You and I were talking earlier. What do you think about audience members and hinders?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If let's say an audience member is yelling during a rally or makes an out call during a rally, right? Is that a hinder necessarily? For me as a referee, I don't think it rises to the level of a hinder. I'm more worried about on-court situations uh, that are associated with play. A ball rolls on the court, a bug flies through the court during a rally, or a bug hits somebody in the eye during a rally. These types of things, those are hinders to me. A player yelling or a spectator yelling something or interacting with the game while it's being played, yeah, it's not a great situation, but I don't think it's a hinder in my book. I may, after the rally's over, I will I will call a referee timeout and address the crowd to say, hey, please keep your comments to yourself while we're playing the match. It is distracting necessarily to the players when you're talking during a rally. So,
Particularly ones that are just as a single outburst, right? Because it's an
right,
interesting, some of us that have been doing this for a while, and uh, certainly the level of excitement and energy in pickleball matches has gone up considerably over the last few years, and that's wonderful. And so we're not golf, we're not tennis,
right.
where you kind of expect that the audience is kind of behaving themselves. We're more like basketball or something along those lines, where you've got people doing all sorts of strange things. Uh, but there isn't really a common set of standards yet for referees to adhere to help control the behavior of the audience. And so it is interesting. What about PA announcements from a Hinder perspective?
So there's a couple ways they handle those. PA announcements from a hinder's perspective during the rally is not a hinder. Okay. There are ways to stop PA announcements from bothering the players before a rally starts, right? If you're a referee, you don't necessarily need to call the score while a PA announcement is going on. Give the players the courtesy, the professional courtesy to wait until the PA announcement is over and then make the score call. There's no time frame or time limit set on a pickleball match. So let's do what's right for the players as a referee.
Cool. And I absolutely agree with that. There have been just the vast majority of the time, uh, we don't consider PA announcements to be that, but there are certain venues sometimes when you've got like a large center court and you're on the court right next to it, and they start making an announcement in the middle of a rally that is just earth shattering. Again, it's kind of up to the referee's discretion. In general, we give a recommendation that PA announcements are not, because it's very common. If we had to wait for every PA announcement or stop and replay after every PA announcement, then that would be unmanageable and we'd be out there forever. But the referee does have some discretion, in my opinion, to deal with out of the box or obscure situations.
Yeah, and inside of the definition or the rule itself, the definition of hinder talks about referee discretion. So yeah, it absolutely applies to that situation. Some of the venues we go to have we're in direct flight path of jets, right? So we're
Yeah.
not going to stop a jet and we're not going to call air traffic control and say, "Hey, can you guys settle this down a little bit until we're done with this match? We'll let you know when we're done. You can start using this flight path again." But yeah, it is up to the referee. I tend to lean more towards on-court situations as hinders, not necessarily so much as the outside influences for a hinder.
So not surprisingly, we had a plan for how long we wanted to spend on this whole podcast on a variety of topics, and we
Yeah.
start getting into fun scenarios, and we've kind of consumed that time. So I don't think we want to continue on to the topic about referee responsibilities. We'll talk about that on the next one. But would you like to do like a summary of the hinder and the distraction discussion before we close out this particular podcast?
I think the biggest thing, as we hit on several times, is something may be distracting, but not necessarily distraction. A distraction is a referee's call. If you catch the ball with something or you stop play on you think is a distraction and the referee doesn't agree, then it's a fault on you. A hinder is a transient object or something that influences play that has come onto the court or outside, as we talked about. It is a replay when it is talked about. So the two main differences, one is a fault, the other is a replay. Those are the main things for me.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Please remember to like this podcast and subscribe to our channel. If you have any specific questions that you would like to ask us or a topic that you would like for us to present, please send an email to viewfromthepost@gmail.com. Again, that is viewfromthepost, all scrunched together, @gmail.com. So this has been View from the Post. Thanks for listening. Zero
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 two.
2.